Oh, Garland Nixon, Martyanov. I always have trouble with that. And Scott Ritter. We got plenty to talk about. Bhakmut, Transnistria, all kinds of stuff. Let's talk. Hello, gentlemen. I really enjoy working with you guys. Whenever either one of you guys are online, I always watch your stuff and I always learn a lot. So I'm looking forward to tonight. And it's really a great night. I mean, in a horrifying and frightening way, because there's a lot going on. Let's start off with what I think is the big one, and that is Transnistria. So apparently, the Ukrainians are gathering troops and all kinds of stuff around Transnistria. There's a huge arms depot there that's been there apparently since the end of the Cold War. And I'm thinking a lot of that stuff probably isn't usable. But at any rate, so there seems to be a move afoot to broaden the war. Now, I'll just say this, and we'll start with Andre. I read some stuff that basically the Russian Ministry of Defense has said, look, if they do that, we'll consider that an act of war. And my thought was, this is a special military operation. War is something totally different. And they're saying it's not going to be the same game if you do that. It broadens the war. It's a very dangerous thing to do. Let's start with you, Andre. Your thought on what's happening with Transnistria, and will Ukraine make that move?
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here with Scott and you, Garland. It's obviously a privilege, really. The issue here is that it wasn't just the defense ministry, it was also the foreign ministry. And it was stated in very clear terms that it will be considered as the attack on Russia proper. And in this case, it's good enough, I think, warning. There is around, I would say, 6,000 plus minus give and take. I never really tracked it down, of Russian regular troops. And of course, there are also people of Transnistria who could be very well armed and dangerous. But I think so that Transnistria was this 800-pound gorilla in the room since since the collapse of the Soviet Union, pretty much. And everybody knew that it was to a degree vulnerable. There's very little depth there, operational depth to defend. As for this arsenal, which they talk about, I think so some of it was former army, 40th Army, actually, I believe, commanded by, at some point of time, by Mr. Levitz, late Mr. Levitz. So some of it could be pretty useful still, depending on the type of the weaponry. So, and will they do it? Possible. How probable it is? I'm talking about Ukraine. I'm not in the position now to give any assessment until we know the fact, what happens.
Your thoughts, Scott?
Well, I mean, I'll second the seriousness of the Russian warning. And let's talk about what that means. Well, first of that, let's talk about what Ukraine could possibly hope to accomplish here. The best thing that could happen for Ukraine is that they cause a major diversion of Russian resources to deal with this issue, and that's actually very attractive right now. If I were Ukrainian, I'd say, yeah, boss, this is something we probably need to do to get the Russians to shift resources away from what they're doing right now, which is basically kicking our butt, and compel them to act, because it is part of Russia, and Russia is going to be compelled to respond to this. Russia can't ignore this. So there's the plus. The minus, Ukraine will never get to fire a single shell that's in that arsenal. I mean, this will get blown in place before the Ukrainians are able to seize control of this. So this can't be done to, as a source of ammunition. So I take that off the table. Two, now I come in and say, hey, boss, let's also talk about the negatives, because the first thing that's going to happen is that you're going to die. Zelensky right now has been given a free pass because Russia views this as a special military operation, and assurances were given early on that that they aren't going to take out Ukrainian leadership targets. They've been threatening it all along. They say if this happens, we can hit leadership targets. We can hit decision-making centers. If this was a war, I'm just telling you right now, the very first target of the day would have been Zelensky. The second target would have been Zaluzhny, and these would have continued to be hit until they're dead or neutralized. You take out command and control, and that hasn't been done, which is proof positive that we aren't at war. If Ukraine attacks Russia, which this would be, then Russia will be at war with Ukraine. And then the other thing that's going to happen, and I would tell Zelensky, is, hey, all that sort of free pass we've been given in terms of getting stuff across the border, they come in on trains and they come in on highways, and then they're able to move, from the west to the east relatively unscathed. That's over too, because now Russia's going to be at war, and they're going to take out every train line, every road line. They're going to take everything out. We will be cut off from the west. You're going to be dead, and we're still not going to win because, as Andrei said, there's 6,000 well-trained, well-equipped Russian troops, backed up by maybe up to another 10,000 Transnistrian militia who are fighting on their home turf. And it's not as though they've never prepared for this. They have a plan in place. There's only 25,000 Ukrainian troops. That's just not enough. And so I just don't see this happening. I think what could be happening is that Ukraine might be doing to Russia what Russia does to Ukraine, for instance, by having a group of forces in Belarus, by freezing Russia in place. Not the 6,000 troops in Transnistria, they're frozen, but by threatening Transnistria, Russia will have to set aside contingency forces that cannot be used in other things. So this is a free one for Ukraine by setting aside 25,000 reserves who can, at a moment's notice, be repositioned to other parts. They're probably going to freeze in place, 50,000 Russian troops and a significant amount of Russian, air power missiles, things that could be otherwise used for this conflict. So it's a force multiplier. I think that's what's going on, because this would literally be. Zelensky has to know he would die almost instantly if they attacked Transnistria. It's over for him. It's over for Zaluzhny. It's over for Ukrainian command and control. It's over for the parliament. So I just can't see Zelensky committing suicide because there's literally nothing to be gained. This will be a loss for Ukraine. Ukraine can't win in this. Now, that doesn't mean they're not going to do something stupid, because desperate people do desperate things. But I believe that if Zelensky relies upon MI6 and CIA support, they advise him, and I can't imagine an MI6 or CIA person saying, "It's a good thing to do, boss." I think they're all going to say, "Let us know before you do it, because we're out of here. We don't want to be anywhere near you physically, because you are literally dead man walking."
Did you have anything else to add to that, Andrei, as to what their reaction would be? And I would add this: all this members of the EU traipsing in and out of Kiev every other week ain't going to happen. But anyway, your thoughts, Andrei?
Scott, absolutely spot on here when he makes this extraordinarily important distinction between the special military operation and war. And the war, even by the documents of the General Staff and central apparatus of the Ministry of Defense, is prosecuted a little bit differently than special military operation, because it involves completely different coefficients, operational coefficients, in terms of, for example, civilian casualties. Sounds horrible, but guess what? If you fight a war, there is a much wider margin which is allowed to your units to have in terms of the civilian casualties. It sounds horrible. I know. I'm a peaceful man. I hate war. But the point is that that thing comes, and Scott absolutely correctly stated, there are a number of Kinjals and 3M14 calibers with the personal names on it of Mr. Zelensky, Zaluzhny, and what's the name of it, the Ukrainian Rada, and things of this nature. And they will be delivered. The targeting is known, it's there. They know, those are fixed targets. Everybody knows where those bunkers are. They saw what Kinjal does at the bunker of the Soviet time at the depth of 60 plus meters. So there's no way they can hide. And so in this case, are they capable of doing stupid things? No. Yes, they are. Will they? It's a brilliant notion that, the CIA and MI6 guys will ask first, what? Let us escape first, and then do whatever you want to do, so that's what it is.
Next, I want to go to something else that I think is important, and that is Poland. What we keep hearing is that, Poland's got 125, 150, however many thousands of troops. They're building more. They're heading in. My first thought is, but they've given up a lot of their stuff, and so they're going to be short. We know they've given up a lot of their ammunition, so they're not in a look. If Ukraine's running out of ammo, they sure don't have ammo to give into Poland. So Poland can't get in there and fight for a long time. So they'll be out of ammo. The people who are concerned about Poland coming into storming into Western Ukraine and, making a move there. Your thoughts on that, Scott?
Well, I mean, let me draw on the words of General Savoli. I might be saying his name wrong. He's the American commander of forces, Cavoli, I think it is. 3-star general. He's also the commander of NATO ground forces. He spoke in Sweden last month, and he said some very interesting things. He said that the scope and scale of the violence taking place in eastern Ukraine today is beyond the imagination of NATO, that NATO never could have imagined this kind of fighting. And that's interesting, because if NATO couldn't imagine it, that means NATO isn't organized for it, trained for it, equipped for it. NATO can't fight that. Now, who's a part of NATO? Poland. So right off the bat, if an American general is saying, hey, my American brigades aren't ready for this, they haven't imagined this. We don't have the ammunition to do this. We don't have the logistics sustainability. We don't have the operational methodology. We don't have anything to do this. The Poles definitely don't. They're not a good military. They're an okay military from a peacetime European standpoint. But this is not a military that can immediately transition to what's going on in eastern Ukraine. They would all die pretty soon. Now we take that and we understand that they've been transitioning their tanks over there. So a lot of their armor reserve is depleted, gone. They've been providing their artillery over there. That's gone. The ammunition is gone. So the Polish military, even before they transitioned stuff over to Ukraine, couldn't fight this war. It's not big enough, first of all. 165,000 troops sounds good on paper, but that isn't 165 combat troops. All right. That might mean that they have less than 50% of that as being combat troops. So let's say 60, 70,000 could fight a war, but they can't fight a war because they haven't imagined it. So they're not prepared for it. So Poland's out of the picture. Now they're talking about beefing up to 300,000. A, that doesn't happen overnight. B, I don't think Poland's going to be able to pull that thing off. The Polish people aren't ready. The Polish military, 10,000 Polish officers and men have left the military instead of re-enlisting because they say, we don't want to have anything to do with this. So, I don't think the Polish military is in a position to do anything. And I have a little concern about Polish politicians being deficient. I don't have a concern about the Polish military. They are professional officers who aren't suicidal. And when given, the thing about professional military officers is they will give you an honest assessment of the task. I have yet to meet a professional officer who says, looking at a plan going, knowing that he doesn't have the forces to do it, going, oh, we got this one, boss. We got this one. No, almost always they say, no, we don't have the forces, the structure. My men can't do that. We haven't trained for this. This is insanity. I don't think it's a good idea. And I think there's Polish officers saying it, which is why this conflict has become politicized with this Polish Legion now, that they're talking about taking former military people, turning them into a Polish Legion that will then be turned over to the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense. But here's where it gets tricky, because that Polish Legion may not have a Polish military component, meaning the Department of Defense is detached, but it definitely has a Polish security service standard. And this is where, or linkage, and this is where it gets tricky, because now people might think if we can get 20,000 legionnaires over there, we have them in place where we can make a move on Western Ukraine at a moment's notice. And this is something that intelligence services might think is an attractive idea. But again, a professional military guy will say, you do know that they're all going to die, because the Russians aren't going to tolerate this, and they will come in with this major force, and they will be backed up by hundreds of thousands of Belarusians, and who will swamp anything we've got in Western Ukraine. So I think the Poles right now are doing a lot of talking, but I think there's realists in the Polish military, and hopefully in the government, that realize they don't want to get tangled up in Western Ukraine.
You know, Andre, let me add this. I know I've talked to people from Poland, and the Polish people are not nearly as supportive of this as we're led to believe, that in the West, that the Polish, sure, they've got these crazy people running the government, but the Polish people are very, very reticent about this. At any rate, your thoughts on, you got this Belarusian contingent up there. Your thoughts on Poland?
I am on the record from the start. If Polish politicians, I specifically make distinction, and Scott and you correctly stated that there is a dramatic difference between, in terms of intensity of Russophobia in Poland, between the political elite and Polish people. They are much more kind of tame, in this respect. I'm on the record that we do not have any more political elite in Poland, which, if it would have been behaving itself properly, less hostile and less Russophobic, that Russia would probably acquiesce to their desire, actually, to take what they call Kresy, which are Western Ukrainian, which are historically Polish territories. And don't forget, Lvov or Lviv, it's a Polish city which was used to be called Lemberg. So, but they actually basically blew the chance, with Russians, with Kremlin. And instead of saying, hey guys, let's hush it over, and then let us kind of, introduce things there, and kind of, Russia doesn't need Western Ukraine. Russia doesn't want Western Ukraine, and that's the problem. But then there is another thing. I spoke yesterday, for example, with my friends from Russia, including people who are basically real professional military reporters, and who are on the front lines periodically all the time, almost, since the start of the operation. We should not forget that that mobilization, with all those 300 plus, I believe 318,000, which have been mobilized, all those reservists, they are not in, how to put it, recruits. Those are people which already served in the armed forces, and they have there what is called, I don't remember the American term for this, but it's called military registration specialty. That means people that are tankers, they are, artillery operators and things like that. They are still not fully introduced there at all. They are just a very small number of the units being introduced into the combat frontline units. Majority of this 300,000 is still primarily in the second echelon, if not rear training. We can only speculate what for, but the point is that first, what is called the course of the LDNR, Lugansk and Donetsk militias, they're not corps or militias anymore. They are official, regular divisions of Russia, and we're talking about 10 to 12 regiment divisions, real deal now. There is a huge influx in the last 2 months of the most modern equipment. And of course, the thing which many people forget, one of the reasons it is possible, and everybody talks about Wagner Group, for example, but nobody talks about the fact that Russians volunteer in huge numbers. And those volunteers, not those people who have been, called through mobilization. We are talking about tens upon tens of thousands who come to the military commissariats every day and say, hey, I'm like, 40 years old or 35 years old. I used to serve, I've been here and there. I was in Chechnya. I was here and there. Send me somewhere. And those people, they form units, formations out of them, and they fight. So, and in this particular case, we are talking that majority of the forces on Russian side haven't been employed yet.
Which let's jump right into it then. Bakhmut, I'm looking all over, and I'm looking at a number of the maps. And if I were Ukrainian, I wouldn't want to be in Bakhmut right now. It looks like the cauldron, or whatever you want to call it, is closing, and it really looks like the Russians now have, at minimum, fire control over all entrances. That there's going to be tens of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers that are going to they're going to put their T-shirts on a white flag, on a mop handle and hold up a white flag, or they're all going to perish. Bakhmut, what's happened there from your understanding, Scott Ritter?
Well, I mean, when you look at the maps, there's an entity called RITTER that puts out some pretty cool looking maps. I look at those. I look at other maps. I'm a prisoner to data that I don't control. So, I can only look at things. I'm not somebody who gets to call up satellite imagery and take SIGINT data and link the two and say, this is exactly what's going on. So, I look at it and I take everything with a grain of salt. But what I'll say is Bakhmut has a tremendous grouping of blue, meaning the little unit icons that they put in there to represent different units. There's a lot of blue in the Bakhmut area. And then as you leave Bakhmut, it sort of thins out. That tells me that the Ukrainians have made a decision that they're going to. Now, Bakhmut has been part of the Bakhmut Soledar fortress that has been prepared for over 8 years for this very kind of thing. And, this is a battle that's been going on since May. It's not like Bakhmut just happened. This is an ongoing battle, and it's been a constant Russian offensive. Russia's never stopped attacking in this area, and Ukraine's never stopped defending in this area. This has been a meat grinder from day one. Prigozhin, who's not prone to exaggeration, he's a narcissist. He's I'm Mr. Wagner. I'm great, but he's been pretty honest about the fighting. And when he says that Wagner alone has killed 110,000 Ukrainians, I believe him. The fighting that has been taking place in Bakhmut's Soledar area has been unreal fighting. It also means that Wagner's lost a lot of people too. I think that's an underappreciated fact. Wagner is a very offensive-oriented organization, aggressive offensive operations, supported by sufficient fire support, but still, they're taking casualties too. This has been bloody fighting. Why? Why would Ukraine do this? First of all, because it's some of the most defensible territory. Second of all, it's close to Donetsk. It's close to the center of the fighting. This has been the anchor of the Ukrainian position, and it's now taken on. At least I believe. Andrei, you can correct me if I'm wrong, because I fully admit I could be wrong on this one, because I'm a historian. So sometimes I'm readily looking for historical analogies.
I am in the same position as you are. I sometimes grab something extra, but yeah, we leave what we can get from.
I'm calling this the Ukrainian Stalingrad. And the reason why I say that is that, like the Germans who poured resources into Stalingrad that shouldn't have been there, the city just wasn't worth it. But the 6th Army was there. They poured in the 4th Tank Army. They poured in everything. Instead of defending their flanks, they poured it in there, and then they ended up losing it all. Ukraine has committed some of their most elite forces into the Bakhmut fighting. Now, I'm somebody who also believes that the reporting of a cauldron is exaggerated, meaning the Ukrainians aren't stupid, they're not suicidal, and there's indications that Zelensky has come to the realization that the battle's over. and so they're trying to mitigate their losses. So some of these units may be pulling out. So the notion that the entire Ukrainian army is going to be captured in Bakhmut, I think, is exaggerated. But it doesn't matter, because the units that they're pulling out are going to be pulled out without their heavy equipment, having suffered sufficient losses, and not readily transferable to other parts of the battlefield. They're going to have to go out and regroup. They're shell-shocked. They are, defeated. And so this has the potential to be one of the more decisive battles of this whole effort. I personally believe that the Russian offensive has already begun. I agree with Andrei that the Russians haven't committed a significant, and I also agree that there are specific breakthrough units, we'll call them, which are equipped with, I don't know, that T-90 breakthrough tank, and the Terminator and other things. They're still training. I mean, it's people don't understand that there are still combat units, and I think Andrei also hinted on something that maybe people don't understand. When Russia started this campaign, this special military operation, their military was organized into what they called the battalion tactical groups, which was the peacetime organization of this, because it dates back to a decision that was made in the 1990s to go away from big Soviet era formations and to go into smaller things, because nobody anticipated large-scale ground combat. Everybody anticipated localized combat like Chechnya, maybe something akin to what happened in Kosovo, etc. They aren't doing the battalion tactical group anymore. Part of the things that's happened in this pause is that the Russians have reorganized back into regiments, back into divisions, back into corps and armies, because they're not playing the little game anymore. They're playing the big game. And the big game's in play, I believe. I believe that, while the focus is on Bakhmut, Bakhmut is a giant sump. That the reason why, one of the reasons why the Russians continue to do that is the Ukrainians continue to deploy forces. Yeah. So if your job is to kill Ukrainians, the business of killing Ukrainians is nowhere better than Bakhmut. Yeah. So fight, hold, bring them in. But meanwhile, in Zaporizhia and Uledar, in Limon, and in other areas, the Russians are pressing forward, in some cases making impressive gains. 5 kilometers here, 7 kilometers there. Sometimes you can look at Telegram. It's problematic to do that, but you can look at Telegram and you can see the videos every once in a while of destroyed Russian equipment and all that. Hey guys, it's called war for a reason. Is everything going to go perfect for the Russians? Are you telling me that a Russian reconnaissance and force using a reinforced company, isn't going to run into a minefield, get hit by prepared artillery fires, and suffer losses? That's going to happen all the time. It's called war. That's why they do a reconnaissance force. But what you're not seeing is when that happens, Russian counter battery fires, taking out the Ukrainian forces, and the Russians then identifying weaknesses. The Ukrainians have committed here, they press here, and next thing you know, that position's outflanked and they've moved forward. Yeah, there's some destroyed Russian equipment, but that's called war. Nothing's perfect. Take a look at everything we did, the United States. Look at our offensive. Look at Operation Cobra and the breakout of the hedgehog positions in Normandy, and you're going to see a lot of destroyed American tanks, a lot of destroyed British tanks, a lot of dead guys, because you have to shape the battlefield. And part of shaping the battlefield is throwing punches and getting punched and committing people to fight. But then because you have superiority of forces, superior organizational structure, you're able to identify gaps, push through. And this is what I believe is happening right now across the whole breadth of the front. The offensive has begun. People are expecting big arrow stuff. This is about grind them down. This is about shaping the battlefield. There will be a time for big arrow, but the Russians aren't going to do big arrow while the Ukrainians have the ability to put a medium arrow into the base of the big arrow, cut it off, and kill it. Again, study maneuver warfare in World War II. The Russians and the Germans in Kharkov in 1943, 1944, the back and forth. A lot of guys died. Russia doesn't want that. Russia is pushing for the destruction of Army Group Center. Again, Andrei, forgive me for my historical analogies, but they're looking for they're looking for the collapse of the Ukrainian forces and then the pursuit. And guess who's going to be pursuing? All the screaming memes right now that are getting trained up, finalizing their training. They're sitting there, and I'll leave it with this. And again, Andrei, correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm an
you're
American.
spot on here.
I'm an American, and sometimes I allow my American analogies to get out of hand. But I've
Totally.
likened the mobilization of the 300,000 Russian reservists to what happened in World War II with the mobilization of an American draftee army. Now, it's an incomplete thing because the Russians are experienced. But what happened to the Americans, and again, Rick Atkinson wrote a brilliant trilogy, and he goes to the Army of Dawn, and then I forget what the middle book is called, and then the Guns Last Battle. But when you get to the second volume, you see the transition of this happy-go-lucky draftee army that didn't want to be there. If everybody thinks that World War II is about American patriotism at extreme, the vast majority of those draftees would have preferred to be home. They didn't volunteer for this. They were forced to do this, and now they're doing it, and they don't want to be there. These aren't elite troops, all this stuff. But then they get thrown into the cauldron of fire, and they quickly realize a couple things. One, that they could die, and they are dying, and that the best way to stop dying is to kill the bad guys before they kill you. And so they get hardened. Then they also realize that they're not contract soldiers. They don't get to go home in 5 months, 6 months. This isn't the American Civil War where you signed an agreement, and when your term ended, you went home. They're in for the duration. So the quickest way to get home is to go through the enemy and take Berlin. And they became the most hardened killers in the world, not because they wanted to be. They had no choice. Now I look at these 300,000, and I'm looking at Russian men that don't want to be there. Oh, they're going because they're. But trust me, if they had a choice, they already served. They want to be home with mama. They want to be in bed with their wife. They want to be playing with their children or their grandchildren, because as Andre said, some of these guys are getting a little long in the tooth and gray in the hair. But they're there doing the job because they've been called up, and they know the only way they get to go home to mama is through the Ukrainians. So these aren't guys who are, excuse my language, half-assing it. These are guys that are saying, we're going to get the job done. I think there's a Russian, yeah, работаю, we're working, we're on the job. And that's their term, man. They're at work, and they're going to do the work, do the job. And I feel sorry for the Ukrainians that are going to face them, because they're facing professional warriors who are committed to a fight, not because of ideology. I do believe that they view this as a second patriotic war, but I don't think that's what's motivating them. What's motivating them is to get home. Get home. The only way to get home is to go through the Ukrainians, and God help the Ukrainians that are standing in front of these guys, because they're going to die.
Andre, we always talk about the concept of the cauldron. You understand that concept. You know the history of that. Talk about Bhakmut, what's going on there, your thoughts on how that fits into, as Scott was saying, the overall plan, what's going on the contact line, but start with Bhakmut.
Scott made an incredibly accurate reference, actually, and it's an American one. It's about Cobra. It's a breakout from Normandy. And then, of course, organization, so to speak, of the Falaise pocket, as they called it. Amar Bradley, it wasn't Patton, it wasn't his level even of understanding all the warfare. It was truly capable and talented Mr. Amar Bradley who developed this plan. And it's actually recorded. And when the Allies started to bomb the sector where they had to break out, he went there, obviously. He was went almost to the front line, because he didn't have to go immediately there. And then he comes back, he reports to Eisenhower, and he reported it was as bad as anything on the Eastern Front. So they're showing this. And of course, then we know the situation there. Breakout happens, the Third Army gets unleashed, and, they trap this number of the Wehrmacht people there. Here, it's practically the same thing, but another matter that we have to tweak a little bit about this cauldron around Bakhmut, because and here comes this thing and you can quote me on that. Those people who advise Zelensky and Zaluzhny, and of course we understand it is CIA, it is MI6, it is Pentagon, which is obviously helping them in terms of the operational planning. Pentagon has an excellent computer system; they can game it, as well as Russian general staff. So, and they game it constantly. But the point is, initially they thought that they will basically bleed Russia there white, because of course there was it's Solidar, it is Solidar Bakhmut Festung, so to speak, the fortress. But of course they miscalculated, and now what happens? They gave it prematurely so much significance that now it's too late to go back, although they're already trying to say, it's not that significant, it's not really that important. But it is important. It is important politically, because obviously starting from tactical level up to operational strategic, it becomes political, because war is a political act first and foremost, But what happens in Bakhmut, the first sign that things are really bad there. You know what? Yesterday, Zaluzhny and Armed Forces of Ukraine, Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, comes up and says, we have about 2,500 people left in Bakhmut. Really? Okay, that means what? They are playing down immediately what is coming. And then, of course, our Russian Defense Ministry and people who in the know, they say, no, it's not 2,500 there. More like 25,000 there, and this will be their prisoners of war. And then, of course, there are confirmed report, horrifying report. Wagner, because Wagner is the main storm group in Bakhmut area, they have now number of the special teams, because they say their corpses sometimes lay not just one way, it's just two layers basically of corpses of all over the battlefield, and they have to collect them, because obviously it's a little bit on the warm side now, and they begin to decompose, obviously. And this is the obviously issue of the hygiene, it's the issue of the infections, it's the issue of the horrible smell which is already there. So they gather them every day, hundreds upon hundreds, sometimes thousands. It's just horrifying what is going there. Literally a meat grinder. And now here's the thing. Everybody were thinking, me included, everybody. And I remember me talking about it. Everybody talks. Douglas McGregor talks. I believe Scott, you spoke too about it. Okay, the land freezes, and, the movement starts. It did start because the land froze at some point of time, but now it's a kind of this what is called Rasputitsa. It's a famous term, which is basically a mix of the slash, and things of this nature. And it's not easy to get move anything of the serious weight in terms of the tanks and APCs. But guess what? It also impedes dramatically. In fact, is crucially the evacuation effort of the armed forces from Bakhmut. That is why, for example, the way those wounded are not treated is horrifying. People are dying in a complete agony. And I mean, listen, I'm not bloodthirsty, man. I understand many of those people have been forced to go there, but plus also reports that majority now of the corpses with the IDs on them, they are from the West Ukraine. Basically, Eastern Ukraine simply ran out of the mobilizational material, and you know what? They hated Russia. Many of them went volunteer to go there. And so at this stage, we're talking about the operational envelopment of Bakhmut, meaning what? The last road which actually they can use is controlled by fire means of Russia. And probably tomorrow, after tomorrow, I don't know, we might be talking about the tactical envelopment when there will be physical closing, and then we'll see what happens. But as Scott correctly stated, we constantly forget that the front itself, the length of the front is more than 1,000 kilometers. People forgot I remember when a few months ago, when Russians totally deliberately left Kupiansk and Krasny Liman, Red Liman, and withdrew. Because why would you kill your 600 sober guys, which is the military police type people, heavy police, when you can withdraw from this town, which you don't need really. Now, guess what? Russia is coming back. And this, if euphoria which they had at that time, that, oh my God, we took like 2,000 square kilometers. Well, guess what? They already gave them up. So it's like, what can I say? And Bakhmut is just one of those places. The whole front now in motion. And as Scott and other people correctly use this wonderful term, will we see those big arrows soon and exploitation? Possible. Very possible. How probable? I would say very probable. Fairly soon.
Scott, okay, then that brings the question. What next? Odessa. Seeing what's going on in Transnistria makes me think it's more probable now. There was the discussion was, well, will the Russians say, okay, we'll use Odessa as a bargaining chip? That at some point we'll say to the West, hey, you make a deal with us or we go to Odessa. Well, it doesn't seem to me that the Russians trust the Americans enough to make a deal with them anyway. And they're making noise in Transnistria. It seems to me, my thought is, at some point, I'm not going to say they're going to go blow Odessa up. I think there is certainly, a historical love for Odessa. They don't want to mess it up.
And
but I can see
architecturally,
yes.
Odessa is marvel. It's
yes.
such a beautiful city. You just don't want to kill it. Yeah.
Right. And there's the whole connection with Greece there and all of that. Scott, what happens? Because let me add this, because Bakhmut, Soledar Falls, I think the Donbass war is technically, theoretically it's resolved. There's nothing between them and the Dnieper River. Do they make a move on Kiev? Do they make a move on Odessa? Things of that nature. What happens next?
Well, first of all, I think there's a whole lot of heavy fighting left in Donbass. Yeah. Donetsk is the Donetsk Republic is still, after Bakhmut, there's high ground west of Bakhmut that has the Ukrainians are already fortifying. You have Kramatorsk, is that the city?
Kramatorsk, yes.
That ain't fallen yet either, and there's the defenses around that. So anybody who thinks that the fall of Bakhmut means the Russians have won the war, not even close. It just means that they've won a very big psychological battle that is part of the overall collapsing of Ukrainian morale. But we got to hand it to the Ukrainians. They fight, and they fight well. I've said this, and again, Andrei, I'm an American who's prone to some exaggeration sometimes, but I have such little regard for NATO and their combat capability. I believe that if there was a ceasefire in Ukraine, organized its troops and pivoted to the West, that they could defeat any NATO military formation there is, because they know how to fight. They're good warriors, and they know what war is, and NATO has no clue. As General Cavoli said, NATO can't even imagine what the Ukrainians have gone through. The Ukrainians are that good, which tells you something about the Russians. I know there's a lot of people out there that are denigrating the Russians. They're bad, they're this, they're that. Did Russia make mistakes? Yeah. Did Russia learn from their mistakes? Yes. And is Russia going to make more mistakes? Probably. Will they learn from those mistakes? Yes. That's called war. No plan survives initial contact with the enemy. And so, you think you got your act together, you come in, the enemy has a vote. That's another saying. So
the most democratic affair is war. Yeah. Enemy always has the say. Yeah.
They got to vote, and sometimes their vote is pretty significant. It's like, oops, we just got beat. But that's okay. You adjust, you adapt, you regroup, and then you go forward again. There's going to be a lot of fighting left. Nobody should ever think that this is going to be easy or quick. So right then, I think that the number one priority for the Russians is to secure Donetsk. And remember, that includes Kramatorsk. That's part of Donetsk. So they've got a lot of fighting ahead of them to do. And to support that battle, I believe the major offensive support will come from the north, from the Kharkov area, because they have to protect that flank. And so this is going to be the focus of effort. Zaporizhia will be a supporting attack, but sometimes supporting attacks become the major attack when they succeed. It's amazing how that happens in the military.
Yes.
You're sitting there going, main effort coming down from the north. Ukrainians are sort of holding us here, guys. It's not working. Oh, God, they just launched a counterattack. We lost 20 kilometers. Look at Zaporizhia. We're moving forward. Hey, boys, freeze, reserves, exploit. You never know how war turns out. But I think the primary effort is going to be securing the Donbass. And securing the Donbass means not just the territory, but remember, I mean, you guys know Ray McGovern. I love Ray McGovern, CIA analyst, former Soviet hand. And I might have been on your show, Garland, where he educated me. Because I'm getting old now, so I call myself an old Soviet hand because I'm actually one of the guys that actually did intelligence analysis during the Soviet times. So I can say I was an old Soviet hand. Ray was the original. He's the original gangster of old Soviet hands. So Ray's like, sure thing, little puppy. Hey, grasshopper, calm down. But he said some interesting things. He talked about criminology. And, that's the old arcane art that was popular in the later part of the Brezhnev years, and then Andropov and Chernyenko, where you just wanted to know what was going on in the Politburo. And so we looked at parades and who's standing next to whom, and who's wearing the right watch, and who has a scarf on, who has a hat on, who, is sneezing, who's looking, who's staring. And everybody would write up these ridiculous reports. I didn't write them up, but I would read them going, are people really doing this? Well, you know who wasn't doing that? Ray McGovern. Why? Because he's a pro. Ray McGovern used a tool called the Foreign Broadcast Information Service. It was a CIA group that translated all the speeches, all the newspapers, all the radio broadcasts, all the and put it in a nice unclassified, they had a classified annex for some of this stuff, but unclassified thing that they publish on a daily basis. I used to subscribe to it. You'd get it, big chunk of stuff, and you read it. And what was interesting is the bad analysts would say, that's just Russian propaganda. Don't read that. That's Russian propaganda. Poison your mind. But Ray went, they have a tendency to say what they mean and mean what they say. And so why don't we listen to what they say? They might tell us a couple things. And Ray was 100% correct. The best intelligence came from simply reading what Soviet leaders said, especially in the local papers, because as bad as, you can say it wasn't perfect, but they didn't lie. They didn't lie to themselves. They told the truth to themselves.
Let me make a comment on that. I work with Russians daily, and I tell people I understand the Russian culture. And my mentor was Paul Robeson Jr., a man who went to school in the Soviet Union, and he and his father were very, they knew Russia. And I say I understand the Russian culture, and that's something I will say. Listen to what the Russians say. They are very, very straightforward. They are very clear. And when they say X, they mean all this business about Russiagate. They're trying to, foment discord. That ain't the Russian culture. If the Russian says, if you do this, I'll punch you in the nose. If you do it, he's going to punch you in the nose. Andre,
well, let me just add one thing. Who's the number one Russian? Because there's a reason why I brought this up.
Vladimir Putin. The
number one Russian is Vladimir Putin. And Vladimir Putin just gave a speech on February 21st. And it's been discounted in the West. It's just propaganda. Propaganda, don't listen to it. Boring. He said everything. Garland, you asked about Odessa. What Vladimir Putin said is, we will be compelled. He said, first of all, our number one objective in the special military operation is the restoration of the economic and social life for Novorossiya and Donbass. Number one objective. Everybody's like, is he going to take Odessa? Is he going to take Kharkov? Is he going to take Kiev? Putin just told you what he's doing. We're restoring the social and economic life of Novorossiya and Donbass. Novorossiya defined as Zaporizhia and Kherson. Now, but then he said something very interesting. Because of the Western armaments that have been provided, we have to push the Ukrainians back from that border to the distance dictated by the weaponry provided. That used to be the range of the M777 howitzer, 40 clicks. Then they got HIMARS. So now the Russians are going to have to push you back 85 kilometers. And now we've given them the upgraded HIMARS, the small bomb missile. That's 150 kilometers. You asked about Odessa, Garland. Here's an exercise that needs to happen. Take a map, take a compass, go to the scale, and put it down and measure the scale 150 kilometers. Now go to Kherson's border, not the one that it is, the whole Kherson, the right bank. Put the needle in the border and draw an arc of 150 kilometers and tell me what falls inside that. And the answer is everything. Odessa, Kharkov. So Vladimir Putin just told you what's going to happen. See, when I talked about the Odessa moment prior to that, it was before the provision of these long-range systems, before and I believed at that time that Russia might pause for what I called the Odessa moment, where they said, do we want to go? Do we want to give them a chance? That's done. The Odessa moment ain't going to happen because things have changed. And one of the things that have changed is that the West continues to provide weaponry that threatens the economic and social reconstitution of Novorossiya and Donbass. Number one priority. To secure that, you must push forward. Now, let me give you the last thing, and Andrei, I'll turn it over to you. If Russia takes Odessa, they're never giving it back. If Russia takes Odessa, they're going all the way to Transnistria. They're cutting off the Black Sea coast.
That's a land bridge, yes.
This is going to happen because Russia's already said, we're taking Odessa. If they take Kharkov, they may have to take Sumy. And if they take Kharkov, they're never giving it back. And if they take Sumy, they're never giving it back. I don't know what the future is going to be for Dnipropetrovsk, but I would imagine that it might too become a Russian city, because when you take that compass and you put the needle on the border and you draw the 150-kilometer circle, that falls into it too. Ukraine and NATO literally slit the throat of Ukraine. They've killed themselves. They've self-immolated. They've committed suicide. And Vladimir Putin, everybody's going, we're waiting for Vladimir Putin to tell us something. He did, guys. He told you everything. You're just not listening.
Andre, and I'll add this. From the very beginning, I always kept wondering, why don't they bomb the bridge across the big, what is that, the big river, the Dnieper River, the big one that runs across the middle of Ukraine?
No, they across in Kherson, the Antonovsky Bridge, they blew it up.
Okay.
So now here comes the other thing, which Scott correctly pointed out. Absolutely. You take the compass and you draw the ranges, and then you see for yourself. If you look at 1944 operations by Talbukhin and other fronts, which were of the Red Army, which were freeing Nikolaev and Odessa, you will see a very interesting pattern. If you look at the shoreline, starting from Kherson, which leads of the Black Sea, which leads towards Odessa, you will see there those long, not rivers, they called limans. There's a long intrusions of sea, sometimes up to 30 kilometers. And in order for you to go from Kherson, that is why Kherson was given up, to take Nikolaev and Odessa, you need to constantly cross and force, those limans. Who would do that? It's just, basically suicide. But if you look at those operations in 1944, what you'll see, they go out through Zaporozhye, and then they turn strictly to the south along the lines of those limans, And guess what Russia is doing right now? This is precisely what Russia is doing right now. It is Kupiansk, it is Red Liman. On the north, you have those guys in Belarus sitting there, tying up all those forces around Kharkov and Kiev in order to secure the flank of the thing when it will begin to turn left. And that's what Scott correctly stated. There will be no, most likely, Odessa moment anymore. Odessa will be taken together with Nikolaev, And this is what is happening now in a strategic sense. And many people don't understand and they think, like just Bhakmut alone. Not by Bhakmut alone. There's a lot of going on. And fact is, yes, on the north of Zaporozhye, and towards Liman and Kupiansk and those places, Russia, yes, gaining ground tremendously, some 5-7 kilometers a day sometimes, so it's significant. You wouldn't read it, of course, in Western media. They do not like to report on those things because they want to concentrate on those brilliant, quote unquote, Ukrainian gains in when it happened, end of summer, early September, and they thought that Russians just left. They never fought it, and yeah, Odessa most likely, and then land bridge to Transnistria.
Last thing I want to touch base with you guys with that, I certainly appreciate you coming on, and that is this issue. One of the discussions now is certainly there's China, there's Russia, and there's an issue of naval warfare.
Mm-hmm.
And the U.S. certainly for years has, we've got a blue water navy. We've got this navy that can certainly a very, very powerful submarine force, but they project their force, I would argue, mainly through these aircraft carrier groups.
Yeah.
With the issue of the range and power of missiles now, it seems to me that in a real warfare, that's kind of outdated. That the ability to project your power through aircraft carrier groups and through surface naval ships, I don't see how you do that anymore with the power of missiles and the range of missiles. Well, we'll start with you, Andrei, this time, since you know the history of these missiles, and what are your thoughts on that?
I'm writing the fourth book on that now. Again, with the advent of the very precise targeting, and Russia and the United States, they do have precise targeting, but in crossing into first supersonic and now hypersonic field, you cannot defend from hypersonic missiles. There's nothing you can do about it. And 3M22 Zircon, which is the newest hypersonic missile, anti-shipping missile, it has official confirmed range of 1,500 kilometers. Something tells me that it might be a little bit longer than that. So it is twice as longer than the modern U.S. U.S. Navy's carrier battle group can touch, even with the Hawkeyes, at the furthest rim, so to speak, of the intelligence and radar patrol. So in this case, yeah, it's over for the surface fleet as we used to know it. It is over. It's simple as that. Then Mr. Shoigu he was blunt. He was almost boring. He said, we don't need new aircraft carriers. We need the weapons which sink them. And the only thing which today remains, United States Navy has a superb world-class submarine force. That, yes, I'm talking about multi-purpose. I'm not talking about the strategic missile submarines. Here we have the situation with the U.S. Navy because it kind of stuck with this Columbia-Cumming class. It's not proceeding as it was supposed to. But in terms of multi-purpose, fast attack submarines, United States is probably arguably the best submarine force in the world. China is not even the same league. Only second one are Russians. The rest of it is just really not even observable on the horizon, And
I'll throw that at you, Scott. And here's the other thing. When you're talking about using the surface fleet, you're talking about projecting power. So if I'm Russia, you got to come to me. You have to come if you want to attack me. If that's the problem with projecting power, even with China, the U.S. has some advantages, certainly, but they got to go 6,000 miles across the ocean. They got to go to China. Anytime you're attacking somebody and they're waiting for you, they have significant, they're firing from their airspace. They're firing from their airfields. You know what I mean? The issue of a surface fleet in modern missile warfare, and I'll even say this, taking into account the fact that in a peer-to-peer exercise, there's a good possibility that there's anti-satellite missiles used and that your satellites may get blinded. But at any rate, currently, your thoughts on that surface fleet with current missile technology?
Well, again, I'll defer to Andrei on the Navy stuff because I think his background is on a ship. I was a Marine. My background was getting off of ships. But General Berger is the current commandant of the Marine Corps, and I have a lot of respect for him, because one of the first things he did when he came in as the commandant is he reviewed the national security strategy of the United States and then the national defense strategy. These are the documents that you receive your guidance from. And he, as the commandant of the Marine Corps, will receive his guidance, what the Marine Corps is supposed to be able to do. And he said, you know, when I read what they want me to do, especially in the South China Sea and all that, I realize we can't do it, and we haven't been able to do it for years. He said, we've been married to legacy concepts. See, the Marine Corps has this big memorial in Washington, D.C., the Iwo Jima Memorial. And we're very proud of it, because we get this sick, perverse notion that it's really cool to lose 5,000 guys going over a beach so we could build a memorial so everybody says, wow, Marines are cool. But dead Marines aren't good Marines. They're just dead Marines. This is why in the 1980s, when I came in, we embraced something called maneuver warfare. And the idea was to avoid going over the beach and losing guys. You avoid where the enemy's strongest and you go around them. But we still retained the legacy of the amphibious battle group, sort of the Marine Corps version of the carrier battle group, where we have these big landing platform docks, LPDs, LHAs, helicopters, and we put all these Marines on these ships. So each ship has a battalion plus of Marines, and we head them in. And then we do what we did in World War II. We park ourselves off the coast, and then Marines disembark, and they circle around in their Amtraks, and then they move into Red Beach and Green Beach and Orange Beach. But Berger said, you'll never even get to do that, because as you come in, the enemy's going to hit you with missiles that we can't defend against. They're going to hit the ship, and all the Marines die instantly, because look, Davy Jones Locker just took them because they sank. And he said, we can't accomplish the mission we've been given. So he did something innovative. He took First Marine Division, which is the Pacific Division, and Third Marine Division, which is the other Pacific Division, and he said, we're going to reorganize. First thing he says, we're getting rid of tanks. And there's a lot of Marines like myself that went, what? Why are you getting rid of tanks? We've always had tanks. He said, yeah, and what good do they do us? Especially if we're going to fight the Chinese in the South China Sea. Don't need tanks. They're expensive. Get rid of them. Military police, don't need them. Get rid of them. We're going to restructure. We're going to go from the standard Marine Corps structural organization, which is built to do old school, amphibious ops, and we're going to turn this something different. We're going to become smaller units. We're going to be able to do things like long range fires. So the Marine Corps, that's always been, I was an artillery officer, not artillery officer. I mean, I was an intelligence officer in an artillery unit, trained in fire support as a forward controller, forward observer, aerial controller. So I could direct artillery fires. And man, we like getting close to the enemy, because then, you call in fires, you blow them up. It's sort of cool. We don't want to be that close. Long range fires. So the Marine Corps is talking about getting the long range fires business. Why? To take on the Chinese, we're going to have to take one island, use it as a fire support base to take another island. And it's going to be like the little island hopping campaign.
Island
hopping. But it's going to be small, so that if they hit one of our ships, we don't lose 1,000 Marines, we lose 60 Marines. And he's doing that because it's a new way to fight the war. Nobody else is doing that right now. The Navy's not. The Navy's not taking a hard look at the carrier battle group. They're married to a legacy system, and they're going to die if they go to war. That's just a statement of fact. And I'll also say this, and Andre, you again correct me, please, because this is your area. But the idea that submarines are all that they're made to be is I'm telling you right now that they're, and I don't want to get too far ahead here, but if a satellite can find a blue whale underwater, it can find a submarine underwater. So the notion that these submarines are out there and nobody knows where they are, I think is a fundamentally flawed notion. I think
except when they go to several hundred meters,
correct,
and then it becomes completely different game. But yes, you can actually visually, you can easily visually, if you are on the aircraft and about 1,000, 2,000 feet in the air, you will see in submarine in a good weather, you will see it probably at around 30 meters. You will physically see it, So, but of course, once the weather stops being nice, which is most of the time, and you don't have the steel and all that thing, yeah, then it becomes difficult. But yes, there are kinds of the detection methods today. Anti-submarine warfare never stands still, and they even what is called the standing wave, because the satellites and modern radar supposedly can detect if on the certain depth, let's say 100 meters, submarine still displaces a little bit of the hill, so to speak, on the surface of the ocean, and they sort of can take, can detect it. But it's one of the other methods, but it's mostly corroborative, the same as MAD, magnetic anomaly detector. It's not the targeting instrument, it's corroboration. You use it for corroboration, but once you know that, it's somewhere in this area, you begin to throw the real deal. Sonar buoys, and you begin to attack it in a completely different way. So yeah, the technology doesn't stand, but here is the issue again. Even anti-submarine warfare is a horrendous issue. I know. My thesis in Naval Academy was anti-submarine. We had the saying, you see this anti-submarine warfare officer, come to him, hug him, give him some money, because their life is so miserable, So, and this is certainly true, and but Scott absolutely correct. I mean, and again, modern weapons, just give me the targeting. And then, for example, that is why Russia flies her Liana satellites. They are not like American satellites, which provide targeting. They fly at around 200, 300 kilometers, low Earth orbit. Russians got their Liana, which is the targeting system, and other intelligence systems, about 550 kilometers. And no anti-satellite weapon really from ships can reach them there. They cannot shoot them down from that orbit. So, but then, of course, we have the whole other can of worms here, which are, of course, space warfare, and that's the whole other thing altogether, So it's just, yeah.
But the point that I made, you made the point about what Shoigu said. I don't need to have a carrier. I just need to sink your carrier. Yeah. And the Chinese don't need to match our submarine fleet. They just need to sink our submarine fleet.
Well, Chinese have issues with their submarine fleet, and the best anti-submarine warfare asset, guess what? It's another submarine.
Yes, I'm not disagreeing, but now we get into space, and this is the Achilles heel of the United States, because we, for the last 20 years, have been fighting war, what we call basic broad spectrum warfare. Where we, total spectrum dominance. And so, and that works when you're killing wedding parties in Afghanistan, you see, because we have perfect intelligence, perfect operations, everything's perfect, and then we can go kill a wedding party. And I'm being facetious, but I'm not, because as perfect as our intelligence was, we killed wedding parties. We didn't kill the bad guys. They beat us, but everything worked. Well, you know what's not going to work? Right now, Ukraine has this artificial sense of accomplishment because they have perfect NATO intelligence, perfect American operational planning, perfect logistics, perfect communications, and all of this is happening. And so it's a force multiplier. So they can take their artillery, which is insufficient numerically, but they can make it appear to be better than it really is, because they're getting great intelligence support, great targeting support, etc. They're still not winning, but it makes them feel bigger. Yeah. If this was a war, and remember we talked about that right at the beginning, the difference between a special military operation and a war. If this was a war, all those satellites shut down. None of that communication takes place. None of that targeting takes place. Nothing takes place. They go dumb. And this applies for everything the United States does, from the ground to submarines, to aircraft carriers, to airplanes. We need perfect intelligence, perfect communication, and we're not going to have that. And
in a real war,
And whereas the Russians actually, while they have good capabilities, the Russians are capable of operating in an imperfect environment. In fact, they train to operate in an imperfect environment. They don't require total spectrum dominance. They just required one boot to go in front of the other boot with an AK and M in their hand, and a tank that's going to turn on when you say turn on, and They use radios. They use old-fashioned tools. They draw lines on maps because that's what war is going to be in the future. In modern warfare, you're not going to have guys with laptops doing this that require a satellite link because there won't be a satellite to link you.
Andre, if you don't mind, one other thing I'd like to ask you, and that is about anti-aircraft, the anti-aircraft networking issue. The U.S. has operated in, the so-called war on terror, and where their aircraft flew, really unopposed. They may have some, a handheld stuff here and there, but for the most part, they weren't facing a sophisticated network of anti-aircraft opposition. There's this talk, we're going to send F-16s, which last time I checked, they were brought into service in 76. Not saying they haven't been upgraded, but we're not talking about a brand new airplane. But at any rate, but again, even if they brought them in, whatever the case, or if there were that competition between NATO and the U.S., the NATO and U.S. pilots, not just them, no one in this world has faced the kind of sophisticated anti-aircraft network that Russia has put together. Your thoughts on that anti-aircraft network and what we're talking about here?
Or on record for years, any air force in the world, the most sophisticated, the most stealthy, the most numerous, like Mr. Ashmanik from RAND, he is a specialist in the air operations there in RAND. In 2017, he said, we need, some kind of 62 air wings to beat Russia in Ukraine. In 2019, he changed the tune and we won't be able to lift half of those airplanes because they will be, annihilated on their runways. But then, of course, you go in and Russian air defense have been always in modern times. We're talking about 70s and 60s and 70s. It was always networked. It was one of the first experience of fully blown net-centric warfare, which of course improved with the processing power. And now when you have by the way, yesterday, there is a rumor, I didn't read yet confirmation, but it looks like they want to take the troops, Army Air Defense, and get it back into the airspace forces. So the Army will stop having its own organic air defense forces, but they do it for organizational reasons. But the point is that if you look at the plethora of Russian missiles and their missile complexes, it's unprecedented. It's just unprecedented. There's nothing like this in the world. I'll give you a hint, and this was from, I believe, 4 years ago, I think. I could be maybe even earlier. In the first air defense missile salvo, Russia at that time had 6,000 missiles. And this is the first salvo of the air defense. Not to speak about the over the horizon, long wave, short wave, middle wave, integrated sensor fused radar and optronic field. So yeah, you cannot get in there. You will be killed basically. The only way you can do it is to stick something, and fly it over what's the name of it? The forest top, forest top. Maybe. And then again, granted that there will be no MiG-31BM in the area and no A-50, AVAX plane. And if they are somewhere near, then you're screwed. You're still not going to do it that well. And the first indication was famous Trump salvo of Tomahawks, FLAMs on Syria. Those guys shot down 79 missiles out of 103 using only S-1 Panzer and good old Buk M1. It's a shocker. That's when it was a shocker. Right now, the performance of the air defense, Russian air defense, it's just mind-boggling. And that is why they want, they could give it ATACMS, and there will be a couple of leakers. Obviously, you cannot shoot down 100%. But the effectiveness is astonishing. It's just mind-boggling. There's nothing like this ever. If you look at Antonovsky Bridge, which was constantly, day in, day out, non-stop barrages of the HIMARS, it stood. It had like 1 or 2 HIMARS hit it once in a while, but guess what? They never destroyed it. Russians blew it up when they were basically leaving, because the air defense was just shooting damn thing down. And now there is another this absolutely astonishing thing. You can look it up on the YouTube. It is there. You have Panzer, which is kind of, Panzer shoots down those HIMARS. And those are essentially, it's extremely high speed targets. And when you look at this, just, oh my gosh. That is why usually they're for pilots and the aircraft of armed forces of Ukraine, their their longevity, so to speak, they stay alive and not shut down probably first sortie. The first sortie, they get shut down, and that's it, And that's how effective it is.
Well, thanks a lot, guys. Scott, where can people find you? I believe it was, what is it, ScottRitterExtra.com?
ScottRitterExtra.com, yep.
And at Real Scott Ritter on Twitter, right?
On Twitter, yeah. I've been told I have to tone it down. Garland Nixon has set a very high standard, so I have to be careful.
Yeah, my gosh, that's crazy. My Twitter story here. I don't even know what to say about that.
Yeah, oh gosh, I laughed so hard today. Oh my God, you called, and I was like, oh my God, can't believe that. But shows how jumpy they are, actually. Oh my God.
Yes. Well, I'll say this because most of the people here know my story. I think I really believe my whole international issue with Twitter was a big part of it was about Nord Stream. I was told, with my tweet, and the 2 countries went bananas, but that they were professionals and intellectuals discussing in Taiwan, discussing online, discussing in China, whether or not Joe Biden had a plan to destroy Taiwan. And they were specifically saying, does he have explosives set? Does he have things set to blow it up? Does he have saboteurs that are in place to blow things up? And I'll say this, that was done by the neocons, because when they sabotage an ally, your other allies are going to look at that and say, do they have saboteurs? They know that you can't be trusted. And to me, it was just, what I did just kind of was a spark. And it's only natural if the 3 of us together, and you see me stick a knife in Scott's back and he falls, and you and I go walking down the street, you're going to keep kind of looking at my hand and feeling your back to wait for the knife to come in. And I think that's the result, Andrei.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. But it still has to be funny nonetheless, It's so.
Well, all right. And you are, Andrei also has a great YouTube channel. I never miss anything on there. I watch it, a lot of great stuff. What's your YouTube channel, Andrei?
Gosh, Smoothie X12.
And do you still maintain your blog, your blog?
Oh yeah, my blog, I practically update it every day. And
what is the name? Where can they find your blog online?
It's called The Reminiscence of the Future. At smoothiex12 at blogspot.com.
There we go.
This
good old Smoothie
moniker stuck to me for now 15 years, and I have even it just
Smoothie X12. That's where you find it. Thanks a lot, guys, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
All
My
right.
pleasure.
All right. I'm gonna see if I can figure out how to get you guys out of here. All right. Thanks a lot, guys. I will talk to you soon. Oops. Here my well, that was a lot of fun, and please do me a favor, share this with all of your share this on all your social media platforms. Make sure everyone hits the big like button. We got 3,183 people. That means we have to have 3,183 likes. If you can help the channel out, there's lots of stuff scrolling across. We've got patreon.com. If you can become a Patreon, that'd be great. We've got of course Cash App, and to follow me on Telegram and PayPal. In any way you can help the channel is appreciated, certainly. And don't forget Rockfin, ROKFIN, rockfin.com. Make sure you join me on Rockfin, so that if they toss me off of YouTube, you can still have a way to find me. Thanks a lot, everyone. Have a wonderful evening. I had a great time. I thought everybody would really enjoy that. I'm going to look at getting those guys back again sometime. Have a great evening.